Hi. In my exploration of the book of Job, I have started reading this book, which I'm going to read some excerpts from. It's called Human Consciousness of God in the Book of Job, a theological and psychological commentary by Jeffery Boss. So it's a commentary style book where he just goes through the book of Job in order and provides his commentary. So I'm going to read a section here that's commenting first on chapter 3 of the book of Job and then on chapter 7 of the book of Job. So in chapter 3 is Job's lament, and it's his darkest, and it's the first thing he says after his sufferings, and it's probably the darkest and deepest lament that Job speaks. And so I'm going to read this part now. In the discourse on the lamentation, it has been argued that Job sees no meaning, no purpose in life's vicissitudes, and finds the absence of meaning still when death and life are considered together. He does not impute to God blame for doing that of which he, Job, cannot make sense. Therefore, he is not saying that God wrongs men, nor does he even seem to strive with God. Here it is relevant to return to Lehman's assertion that at the heart of Job's lament is his faith. It would make little sense for the sufferer to say that once life used to have meaning, but now has lost it. The need for life's meaning must be the need for the meaning of life as a whole. If life has one time meaning and then none, the loss of meaning must be the loss of meaning for life before the loss as well as after. Therefore, Job refers to his coming into being, not with the turn of his fortunes. So this is referring to Job in his lament curses the day of his birth and basically wishes he was never born. He doesn't lament the disasters in chapter 3 or the immediate catastrophes that have struck him. He laments the day he was born. So that's what it's referring to. So I'll read that sentence over again. Therefore, Job refers to his coming into being, not the turn of his fortunes. As for a way out of Job's agony, it is not within the lament that we are told what might yet give meaning to Job's life, or, and this may or may not be more to the point, what might transcend the need for meaning. That, if it is to be shown, is still to come. Job will later refer to his loss and pain as persecution by God, unilaterally shattering their old relationship. The keystone has come out of the arch of Job's life. The loss and pain as such he has already accepted, but their implication is then to be felt as a more inclusive loss. Later, Job will complain of his social, physical, and mental suffering, not so as to attribute wrongdoing to God, but to particularize God's persecution, or to show the friends their moral failure in debating over this suffering rather than comforting the sufferer whom they blame, or to compare his state with times past in order to speak of his innocence then. Job is plunged into utter darkness and will emerge. Perhaps it is comparable with the dark night of the soul of St. John of the Cross. It is neither sadness nor melancholy nor clinical depression. The loss of the relationship with God may be comparable, not necessarily identical, with a bereavement when something is torn away to leave a wound. Okay, so now I'm going to skip ahead to what he talks about according to chapter 7. So what happens after chapter 3 is the first friend responds, Eliphaz responds, and he speaks for chapters 4 and 5. And then Job speaks in chapter 6 and 7. And so this is the commenting on 6 and 7, and there'll be some references to verses in this. Job goes on to speak about the transience of life in 7:6, concluding that my eye shall not return to see good, 7:7. This bears upon the attitudes in the book of Job to resurrection and immortality. Also, one must be careful before finding such belief necessarily relevant to Job's plight. An evil suffered is an evil suffered, whatever comes after. We cannot dodge the challenge of the book of Job by supposing that joy comes to cancel present suffering or in itself gives meaning to the agony. This does not necessarily, of course, make the suffering pointless. Concerning the point of Job's speech from 7:7 to the end, Greenberg asks, could Job in his prosperity have appreciated the anguish of victims of senseless misfortune or regard God as an enemy of man? All right, so I'm going to go forward a little bit. In each response to the three friends in the first round of 3 exchanges, Job includes speaking to God. The friends, on the other hand, and Elihu after them, speaks about God, but never to God. Job, of course, also speaks about God. So Job's speaking both to God and about God, and the friends are only speaking about God. The poet thus brings out a distinction which may be further illustrated by 2 examples. I'm just going to read the second example. The teaching of Martin Buber. According to this, the I that says you is different from the I that says it. Since the relationships I, you, and I, it must each be taken as primary. Within this framework of discourse, we may say that the friends relate themselves to God only according to I, it, while Job lives also within an I, you relationship with God. At the end of his speech, Job thus comes to the conclusion that soon he will lie down in the dust, or lie down becoming dust, and that when God seeks him, he will be gone. This is the punchline. God needs Job, but is preventing Job from meeting that need. This saying has several implications. The first is that my servant Job finds himself unable to serve now that the old settled relationship has been disrupted by God. Next, Job is saying that if God seeks him out for this service, Job may be no longer there. Third, this implies that Job no longer considers that the service appropriate from a human being to God is possible in Sheol, which is the place for those who have died. Finally, we note that God may seek him, although Job generally speaks as though God knows where he is. In context, this means that God may seek him for a purpose which Job believes his condition precludes. Therefore, Job says indirectly that God needs him. That he can realize this implies a dignity for Job, which must be a step out of the depths from which his lament came. The doctrine that God needs humanity has been taught elsewhere. In the biblical creation story, humankind is made in God's image. That is, the image of the Creator. We are co-creators. The Kabbalists taught that the universe is in need of redemption, and that this requires humanity as a redeemer. The alchemists believe that it is a human task to redeem the spirit in matter. Meister Eckhart says that God needs human friendship. Following Job's lament, Eliphaz speaks, assuming that retributive justice must be operative, and therefore that Job's suffering must be the result of previous unrighteousness. Eliphaz offers his personal reliability as an argument ad hominem indeed for gaining assent, an argument from neither reason nor experience. Job is now faced with 2 possibilities. Eliphaz has presented a coherent view which puts Job's suffering into a universal context, explains it, and points a way forward. That is to say, if Job persuades himself of the correctness of what Eliphaz had said, he has gone some or all the way to remedy the lamented meaninglessness of his life. Nevertheless, if Eliphaz provides Job with meaning, it is not necessarily true meaning. The catastrophic breadth and abysmal depth of what Job is suffering can correspond to nothing in him that could have deserved what he is undergoing. What the prologue has said of him serves to support this. So the second possibility for Job is to reject Eliphaz's argument, to convince himself that Eliphaz speaks truly would to give meaning to the suffering, going to the heart of the suffering itself, a powerful temptation. On the other hand, if that temptation is overcome because Eliphaz speaks contrary to what Job knows of himself, Job has no comfort, but is not persuading himself that which he knows to be untrue is true. Let me read that sentence again. On the other hand, if that temptation is overcome because Eliphaz speaks contrary to what Job knows of himself, Job has no comfort, but is not persuading himself that what he knows to be untrue is true. Job rejects the temptation and holds to his integrity. He speaks of his afflictions in terms that make it impossible that they correspond to any misdeeds of which he is aware. Job implicitly brushes aside Eliphaz's claim to authority, pointing out that Eliphaz does not even act as an ordinary comforter of the bereaved, and thus has failed the duty of comforting the mourner. Job's turning to God has not the contrition applied in Eliphaz's advice. In answering Eliphaz's incomprehension or insensitivity, Job has had to bewail specific afflictions, not only the meaninglessness already lamented. Thus, Job has brought to mind what God has done to him, and at the same time the lack of an understandable cause of what God has done. And he turns to address God concerning the afflictions. In rising before God face to face, Job discovers a certain dignity. Job points out that he has been made a burden to God, not a help, and that he will not be there for God when sought. Whereas Eliphaz stressed that Job needs God, Job has come to the realization that he is needed by God. To sum up, Job has taken the path out of his sense of life's pointlessness through temptation to development. Job in his integrity overcomes a temptation, refusing from experience and reason a potentially ensnaring falsity. This leads to turning to God and gaining the understanding that not only does he need God, but also that God needs him.